The Galactic Warning. The galaxy was vast, beautiful, and full of mysteries. Among its countless stars and planets, there were stories that filled the hearts of many with awe and wonder. But there was one story that filled everyone with fear, a story about her. They called her Lyra, the Destroyer. To most, she was not a person, but a nightmare. A being so powerful that entire planets fell silent at the mention of her name. It started years ago when a distant system vanished without a trace. The planets were reduced to barren rocks floating in the void. Survivors whispered of a glowing figure, a being with eyes that burned like suns, and a voice that echoed across the stars. They said she could crush fleets with a wave of her hand, bend space itself, and create storms that swallowed entire worlds. The Galactic Union, a coalition of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, issued a warning. Lyra is the greatest threat to peace. Avoid her at all costs. They sent fleets to capture or destroy her, but none returned. Ships disappeared, communication was lost, and fear spread like wildfire. To the galaxy, Lyra was a monster, a force of destruction with no conscience. But not everyone believed the stories. Captain Ethan Ward was a human from a small colony on the edge of the galaxy. Unlike most humans, Ethan wasn't afraid of the unknown. In fact, he was fascinated by it. His curiosity had taken him to places no one dared to go, and his bravery had earned him a reputation as one of the most daring explorers in the Union. Yet even he couldn't escape the rumors about Lyra. Ethan sat in the command chair of his sleek ship, the Starlight Horizon, as he listened to the latest broadcast from the Union. The warning played over the speakers. Lyra has been sighted near the Veil Nebula. All ships are ordered to avoid the area. Another warning, muttered his first officer, Lena. She was a sharp-minded woman with a knack for spotting trouble before it arrived. They're really scared of her. Maybe they should be, said Garen, the ship's engineer. From what I've heard, she's unstoppable. Destroyed entire fleets, didn't she? Ethan leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the holographic map of the Veil Nebula. It was a dense region of swirling gases and hidden stars, a place most captains avoided. But Ethan wasn't most captains. Do you really believe she's as dangerous as they say? Ethan asked, his voice calm but thoughtful. Lena raised an eyebrow. You've seen the reports, Captain. Whole planets wiped out. Entire systems abandoned. I'd say the evidence speaks for itself. Evidence, Ethan repeated, leaning back in his chair, or stories told by people who never got close enough to find out the truth. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They knew their captain well. When Ethan got curious, he didn't back down. It didn't matter if the galaxy thought something was dangerous. Ethan wanted answers. And now, it seemed, he was considering going after the one being everyone else was running from. Captain, Garen said hesitantly, are you thinking about going there? Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that made his crew both admire him and fear for their lives. If Lyra is truly as powerful as they say, why hasn't she destroyed everything? Why does she stay hidden in the nebula? There's something we're not being told. Or maybe, Lena countered, she's just waiting for the right moment to strike. Maybe, Ethan agreed. But what if she's not the monster they say she is? What if the galaxy got it wrong? The room fell silent. It wasn't the first time Ethan had challenged the official narrative, but this was different. This wasn't some abandoned ruin or forgotten planet. This was Lyra, the most feared being in the galaxy. Captain, Lena said carefully, if we go to the Veil Nebula, we might not come back. Ethan stood, his expression unwavering. I know, but if there's even a chance that she's not what they say, don't we have a responsibility to find out? What if the galaxy is making a mistake? What if she's not the destroyer but something else entirely? The crew didn't answer right away. Deep down, they knew Ethan was right. The galaxy had made mistakes before, judging beings and civilizations too quickly, acting out of fear instead of understanding. But going after Lyra was still unthinkable. "Set a course for the Veil Nebula," Ethan ordered. "We'll approach with caution, but we're going to find the truth." Lena sighed but nodded. "Course set, Captain." As the Starlight Horizon powered up its engines and prepared to jump to hyperspace, a strange sense of excitement filled the ship. The crew didn't know what awaited them in the nebula. But one thing was certain: they were heading into the unknown, to face the most feared being in the galaxy. And in Ethan's heart, a spark of hope burned. He didn't see Lyra as a threat. He saw her as a mystery, one that might just change everything. The encounter. The Starlight Horizon floated in the eerie silence of the Veil Nebula, its sleek frame illuminated by the swirling ribbons of blue and purple gases surrounding it. Captain Ethan Ward stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, staring into the mesmerizing chaos. The nebula seemed alive, breathing, as if it knew they had arrived. "She's out there," Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to his crew. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lena sat at her console, scanning for any trace of Lyra. Every blip on the radar, every flicker on the monitor sent waves of unease through the crew. Even Garin, usually calm under pressure, was fidgeting with a loose wire on his tool belt. "Captain," Lena finally broke the silence. "We've got something. A massive energy signature, 3 clicks ahead. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Ethan's heart quickened, though he kept his voice steady. "Visuals." "Working on it," Lena replied. The screen flickered, and then it appeared. A massive, glowing figure, standing on what seemed to be a platform of pure energy. She was humanoid in shape, but radiated an unearthly aura, her form shimmering like starlight. Her eyes, 2 piercing orbs of gold, looked directly at them, as if she had been waiting. "It's her," whispered Garin, his voice trembling. "It's Lyra." Ethan stepped closer to the viewport, his gaze locked on the figure. She didn't move, didn't attack. She simply stood there, watching. The legends had painted her as a monster, but in this moment, Ethan saw something else, something no one had ever described. There was no rage, no malice in her stance. Instead, there was a strange calmness, almost sadness. "She's not attacking," Ethan said, breaking the heavy silence. Yet, Lena shot back. "Captain, we need to leave. Now. Before she." A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ship's hull. Lights flickered, and the crew braced themselves, expecting the worst. But instead of an attack, a voice echoed through the ship's comm system, soft, melodic, and impossibly ancient. "Why have you come?" The crew froze. It wasn't a threatening tone, but it carried a weight that seemed to press down on their very souls. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steadied despite the fear in the room. "We came to talk," he said, addressing the figure directly. "I want to know the truth about you." The voice replied, softer this time, almost hesitant. "The truth, or the lie they told you?" Ethan glanced at his crew. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. He knew they thought he was crazy, but he couldn't back down now. "The truth," he said firmly. "The galaxy sees you as a threat, but I don't believe that's the whole story. I came to understand." There was a pause, a silence so deep it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, Lyra stepped forward, her luminous form growing brighter as she approached the ship. The energy around her shimmered like a living aurora, beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Your kind has hunted me for centuries," she said, her voice laced with sorrow. "They fear what they do not understand." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then help me understand." Another pause. Then, to everyone's shock, Lyra raised her hand. The crew flinched, expecting an attack, but instead, a soft beam of light extended from her palm, connecting with the ship. The bridge was bathed in golden light, and Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest, a deep, unexplainable connection. In that moment, he saw glimpses of her past, A world in flames, a people crying out for help, and Lyra standing amidst the chaos, wielding her power not to destroy, but to save. He stumbled back, his breath catching. "You're not a destroyer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're a protector." Lyra's glowing eyes softened. "And yet, they call me a monster." "Captain, this is insane," Lena hissed. "She's manipulating you. We need to leave before she—" "Enough," Ethan snapped, his voice ringing with authority. He turned to face his crew, his expression fierce. "She's not the enemy here. If we run now, we'll prove the galaxy right. We came for the truth, and we found it. The question is, what do we do with it?" Before anyone could respond, Lyra spoke again. "You have seen what they refuse to see. But the galaxy does not forgive easily. If you choose to stand with me, you will become an outcast." Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. For the first time, Lyra smiled, a small, fleeting expression that held more pain than joy. "Then you are braver than most." The golden light faded, and Lyra's form began to retreat, dissolving into the swirling mists of the nebula. Ethan's heart sank as he realized she was leaving. "Wait," he called out. "What happens now?" Her voice echoed one last time, softer than a whisper. "Now you must decide. Will you believe in what you've seen, or will you follow their lies?" And with that, she was gone, leaving the starlight horizon alone in the nebula once more. But for Ethan, there was no going back. The truth had been revealed, and the real battle was just beginning. The truth behind the fear. The silence of space felt heavy as Captain Ethan Ward replayed the images Lyra had shown him. He sat alone in his quarters aboard the starlight horizon, staring at the holographic recorder in its hand. The device glowed faintly, a simple tool for capturing logs, but Ethan hadn't activated it. How could he put into words what he had seen? How could anyone believe him? The images weren't just memories. They were pieces of a life shaped by tragedy, a world flourishing under golden skies, a people whose laughter echoed through valleys and mountains. And then, the invasion. Ships black as night, descending like locusts, consuming everything in their path. Lyra had been there, at the heart of it all, wielding powers she barely understood to protect those she loved. But her strength had come at a cost. "Captain." Lena's voice broke through the comm system, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. "We're approaching the Galactic Union's communication range. What are your orders?" Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening around the recorder. The Union wouldn't care about Lyra's past. To them, she was a threat, a weapon of mass destruction. They wouldn't listen to reason, not when fear clouded their judgment. "Captain." Lena prompted again. "Hold position," Ethan said, his voice firmer now. "I need more time." He left his quarters and made his way to the observation deck. The nebula stretched out before him, a swirling ocean of light and shadow. Somewhere out there, Lyra was waiting, but not for him. She was waiting for the galaxy to understand, to see her as more than a monster. Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. Changing minds never was. Garen was already on the deck, tinkering with a panel. He looked up as Ethan entered, his expression wary. "You don't look like a man with good news." "I'm not sure what kind of news it is," Ethan admitted, leaning against the viewport. "But I know one thing. Lyra isn't who we think she is." Garen frowned, setting down his tools. "What do you mean?" "She's destroyed planets, Captain. There are survivors who've seen it." "She didn't destroy them," Ethan said, his voice steady. "She saved them." Garen blinked, clearly skeptical. "Saved them? By turning them into dust?" Ethan turned to face him, his eyes sharp. "The planets weren't destroyed, Garen. They were evacuated. Lyra used her power to shield the people, to move them to safety before the invaders could take them. What you see as destruction was her sacrifice." Garen opened his mouth to argue, but Ethan cut him off. "Do you know what it's like to be the only one standing between your people and annihilation? to have power you don't fully understand, but to use it anyway because you have no other choice. That's what Lyra did. She didn't ask for this. She was forced into it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Garin looked away, his jaw tightening. Even if that's true, Captain, the galaxy won't care. All they see is the destruction, the fear. Then we'll make them see, Ethan said firmly. We'll show them the truth. Before Garin could respond, Lena's voice crackled through the comms. Captain, we've got an incoming transmission from the Union. Ethan's heart sank. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready. Patch it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Carver, a towering figure of authority within the Union. His cold eyes scanned Ethan, as if searching for signs of betrayal. Captain Ward, the Admiral began, his voice like ice. You've been reported in the Veil Nebula, dangerously close to the entity known as Lyra. Explain yourself. Ethan stood tall, refusing to show weakness. I've made contact with Lyra, sir, and she's not what we think she is. Admiral Carver's expression darkened. You've what? Captain, that creature is a threat to the galaxy. Any contact with her is considered treason. With all due respect, sir, the Union is wrong, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. Lyra isn't a destroyer. She's a protector. The destruction we've blamed her for was her attempt to save lives. Carver's eyes narrowed. Do you have any proof of this claim? Ethan hesitated, knowing that the truth alone wouldn't be enough to convince the Union. I have her memories. Her story. If you would just... Enough, Carver interrupted, his tone final. You've been deceived, Captain. Lyra is manipulating you. Return to Union space immediately, or face the consequences. The transmission cut off before Ethan could reply. He stood there, staring at the empty screen, his mind racing. The Union wasn't going to listen. If they found Lyra, they would destroy her without hesitation. Garin approached him cautiously. So, what now? Ethan turned back to the viewport, his jaw set. We proved them wrong. How? Garin asked. They won't listen to us. Then we'll make them listen, Ethan said, a fire burning in his eyes. Lyra's story deserves to be told, and we're going to tell it, no matter the cost. The starlight horizon hummed with quiet energy as it prepared for the battles ahead. The crew didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain. They were no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to the truth. And for Lyra, they would fight. The hidden power. The starlight horizon was adrift in the heart of the Veil Nebula, its lights dimmed to blend with the surrounding mists. Inside the ship, tension simmered as the crew waited. Captain Ethan Ward stood in the central chamber, staring at a swirling sphere of golden light that floated between him and Lyra. She had boarded the ship without a sound, her presence both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Now she was revealing something no one else in the galaxy had ever seen. This, Lyra said softly, her voice echoing like a melody across the chamber, is the core of my power. Ethan watched, mesmerized, as the sphere pulsed gently. It was not violent or destructive. Instead, it felt alive, like a heartbeat. The light danced across the walls, casting shimmering patterns that seemed to tell a story. Ethan could feel the power radiating from it, not cold or threatening, but warm, almost comforting. Lena stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed tightly. That's what destroyed entire planets, she asked, her tone sharp. You expect us to believe it's harmless. Lyra turned her glowing eyes toward Lena. It is not the power that destroys, she said calmly. It is how it is used. Ethan stepped closer to the sphere, feeling its warmth wash over him. Then what is it, really? He asked. If it's not a weapon, what is it? Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, the weight of her centuries of solitude seemed to lift. It is creation, she said. Pure energy, drawn from the stars themselves. It can heal, rebuild, and give life. But when used in desperation, It can also destroy. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan's mind raced as he thought about the devastation attributed to Lyra. Could it all have been misunderstandings? Could her attempts to save lives have been seen as attacks? "Show me," Ethan said suddenly. Lyra tilted her head, her gaze searching his face. "Show you what?" "Show me what it can do," he replied, his voice steady. "Not the destruction, the creation." For a moment, Lyra seemed unsure. Then she nodded, raising her hands toward the sphere. The golden light began to shift, expanding outward in delicate strands that floated through the room. One strand touched the edge of a cracked console, and before their eyes, the damage began to repair itself. Wires reconnected, panels smoothed out, and the console lit up as if it had never been broken. The crew gasped. Even Lena, ever the skeptic, stepped forward, her eyes wide. "That's impossible." "It is balance," Lyra said. "For every ounce of destruction, there is equal potential for creation, but the galaxy only sees what it fears." Ethan turned to face her. "Why didn't you show them this? Why didn't you tell the Union?" "They would not listen," Lyra replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "They came with weapons, not questions. They saw only a threat. And so, I became what they feared." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a blow. He thought about the Union's refusal to hear him out, their unwavering belief that Lyra was a monster. How many lives had been lost because of that fear? How much destruction had been wrought because no one had taken the time to understand? "We can change that," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "We can show the galaxy what you really are." Lyra shook her head. "They will not listen. They are too afraid." "Then we'll make them listen," Ethan said firmly. "We'll find a way." Before Lyra could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Garen's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got incoming. It's the Union fleet. They've found us." Ethan's heart sank. He turned to Lyra, who stood motionless, her glowing form pulsing faintly. "You have to leave," he said. "If they find you here." "No," Lyra interrupted, her voice steady. "I will not run. Not this time." Ethan stared at her, torn between admiration and fear. "Then what do we do?" Lyra stepped forward, the golden light swirling around her like a protective shield. "We show them the truth." The alarms grew louder as the starlight horizon prepared for the imminent arrival of the Union fleet. Ethan glanced at his crew, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. They had come too far to back down now. "Lena," Ethan said, his voice commanding, "open a channel to the fleet. Let's see if they're ready to listen. And if they're not." Lena asked, her hand hovering over the console. Ethan looked at Lyra, her radiant presence filling the room with light. "Then we'll make them see." The starlight horizon shuddered as the first Union ships came into range, their weapons primed and ready. But for the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. They weren't just facing the Union. They were standing for the truth. And with Lyra's hidden power finally revealed, they had a chance to change the galaxy forever. The galactic pursuit. The first volley struck just as the starlight horizon broke through the edge of the Veil Nebula. Union destroyers, sleek and deadly, emerged from hyperspace like predators closing in for the kill. The hum of their weapons charging was a warning Ethan Ward couldn't ignore. "They're not wasting any time," Lena muttered, her hands flying across the console as she rerouted power to the ship's shields. 5 ships, no, 7, headed straight for us. Captain Ethan Ward leaned forward in his command chair, his jaw tight. "They weren't supposed to find us this fast." "They weren't supposed to find us at all," Garen said from the engineering console, his voice laced with frustration. "What happened to the nebula hiding us?" "They must have traced Lyra's energy signature," Ethan said, glancing at the glowing figure standing silently in the corner of the bridge. Lyra's golden aura pulsed faintly, her expression calm despite the chaos unfolding around her. "This is my fault," she said softly. "They won't stop until I'm gone." Ethan turned to her, his voice firm. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the truth. And we're not running." The starlight horizon shuddered as another blast hit its shields. Sparks flew from a nearby console, and Lena cursed under her breath. "Captain, we've got maybe 5 minutes before they overwhelm us." Ethan clenched his fists. The Union fleet wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to eliminate a threat. But Lyra wasn't a threat, and Ethan wasn't about to let fear dictate the galaxy's future. "Lena, open a wideband channel," he ordered. "Are you serious?" she asked, her eyes wide. "They're shooting at us, Captain. They're not in the mood to talk." "Do it," Ethan insisted. "They need to hear this." With a reluctant nod, Lena tapped a series of commands. "Channel open." Ethan stood, his voice ringing with authority as he addressed the Union fleet. "This is Captain Ethan Ward of the Starlight Horizon. Stand down. We are not your enemy." The response came almost immediately, sharp and cold. "Captain Ward, this is Admiral Carver. You are harboring the most dangerous being in the galaxy. Surrender her now, or face the consequences." Ethan glanced at Lyra, who met his gaze without flinching. "Admiral, you're wrong about her. Lyra isn't a destroyer. She's a protector. Everything you've been told about her is a lie." Carver's voice turned icy. "You've been deceived, Captain. Lyra's actions speak for themselves. Billions of lives have been lost because of her. And billions have been saved," Ethan countered. "She used her power to evacuate planets, to protect innocent lives from invaders. You've seen the destruction, but you've ignored the lives she saved." "Enough," Carver snapped. "You've chosen your side, Captain. Now face the consequences." The channel cut off, and the Union ships opened fire in unison. The Starlight Horizon shook violently as its shields struggled to hold. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to keep the ship intact. "They're not listening," Lena shouted over the chaos. "What now, Captain?" Ethan looked at Lyra. "Do you have enough power to stop them without hurting anyone?" Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering. "If I use my power, it will only confirm their fears. They'll never believe I'm not a threat." "Then we show them," Ethan said. "Not with destruction, with creation. Can you project something? Something they can see?" Lyra's expression shifted, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "I can try." She stepped forward, raising her hands. The golden aura around her intensified, spreading out like ripples in a pond. The bridge filled with light, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then, outside the ship, a breathtaking display unfolded. Massive holographic images appeared in the space between the Starlight Horizon and the Union fleet. They were scenes from Lyra's memories, her homeworld, a lush paradise bathed in golden light, her people thriving and happy, and the invaders, dark ships raining fire from the skies. The images showed Lyra standing at the center of it all, her power shielding her people from annihilation. The final image froze, Lyra holding back a wave of destruction, her face filled with sorrow as her home crumbled around her. The Union ships stopped firing. On the bridge, Ethan watched as the incoming fire ceased. "It's working," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A transmission crackled to life. Admiral Carver's voice, now quieter, came through. What is this?" "The truth," Ethan replied. "She's not a monster, Admiral. She's a survivor, and she's been protecting this galaxy longer than we've been fighting it." Silence filled the comms. For a moment, it seemed as though the Union fleet might stand down. But then, another voice broke through, an officer shouting about a secondary fleet approaching, one that wouldn't hesitate to attack. Ethan turned to Lyra, his heart sinking. "This isn't over." "No," Lyra said, her voice steady. "But it's a start." As the Union fleet held its position, the Starlight Horizon prepared for the next wave. They had shown the truth, but whether the galaxy would accept it was a question that remained unanswered. For now, Ethan and his crew stood firm, ready to fight for what they believed in. A choice between war and peace. The void of space trembled as the second Union fleet emerged from hyperspace, their arrival marked by the ominous hum of battle cruisers and war frigates positioning for an attack. The starlight horizon floated in the center of it all, dwarfed by the vast armada now encircling it. Lights from the approaching ships glinted off its hull, casting long shadows over the bridge. Captain Ethan Ward stood at the command console, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. The air was thick with tension, and the crew watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. The First Fleet had hesitated after witnessing Lyra's memories, but this second wave showed no such pause. Their intentions were clear. Annihilation. "They've locked weapons on us," Lena announced, her voice sharp and tight. No messages, no warnings. Ethan's heart pounded as he looked at the holographic display. The fleet's formation was precise, a wall of death closing in on them. But his attention wasn't on the enemy ships, it was on Lyra. She stood at the center of the bridge, her golden aura pulsing faintly, a quiet storm of power and restraint. "They won't stop," Lyra said, her voice calm but edged with sorrow. "Their fear has consumed them." "They don't understand," Ethan replied, stepping toward her. "But we can still make them see. We have to." Lyra turned her glowing eyes to him, studying his face. "You believe in peace, even now, after all you've seen." "Because of all I've seen," Ethan corrected her. "You're living proof that peace is worth fighting for." Before Lyra could respond, the comm system crackled to life. Admiral Carver's voice boomed through the ship. "Captain Ward, this is your final warning. Surrender the entity, or we will open fire. There will be no further negotiations." Ethan moved to the console and activated the wideband channel. "Admiral, listen to me. If you attack now, you'll be making the worst mistake in the galaxy's history. Lyra isn't your enemy. She's the galaxy's last hope." Carver's reply was immediate, cold, and unyielding. "Captain, you are under the influence of a dangerous entity. We will not risk the safety of billions for one being." Ethan's jaw clenched, then let her speak for herself. He motioned to Lyra, who stepped forward. Her luminous form seemed to brighten, her voice carrying an otherworldly weight as she addressed the fleet. "I am not your destroyer," she began, her tone steady. "I am not your savior. I am simply one who has seen the pain and fear that consumes this galaxy. You do not understand my power because you have only seen it used in desperation. But if you force my hand now, you will leave me no choice." Her words were a warning, but they carried no malice, only a deep, profound sadness. Ethan watched as the holographic display showed the fleet shifting into attack formation. The Second Fleet wasn't listening. They were preparing to strike. "Captain," Lena whispered urgently, "they're about to fire." Ethan's mind raced. The shields wouldn't hold against a full-scale assault, and Lyra's power, misunderstood and feared, might only escalate the conflict. He had seconds to make a decision. "Lyra," he said, his voice low but firm, "you said your power could create as well as destroy. Can you use it to show them what's possible? Not just memories, but something real." Lyra hesitated, her glow flickering. "If I do, it will drain me. I may not survive." Ethan met her gaze, his voice resolute. "If we don't try, no one will survive." Lyra closed her eyes, and for a moment, the bridge was silent. Then, with a deep, resonant hum, her light began to expand. Golden waves rippled outward, passing through the walls of the ship and into the void of space. The Union fleet paused as the energy reached them, enveloping their ships in a gentle, shimmering glow. And then it began. Planets appeared in the void, projections of what could be. Lush, green worlds teeming with life. Cities rebuilt from ruins, their people thriving. Star systems once scared by war, now peaceful and whole. The visions were breathtaking, a glimpse into a future where destruction was not the answer. The fleet hesitated. For the first time, the overwhelming tension seemed to waver. Ethan could see it on the display. Ships holding their fire, formations breaking. The golden light touched something deep within the hearts of those who watched, a spark of hope they hadn't felt in years. But not everyone was swayed. A single frigate broke from the line, its weapons charging. Ethan's stomach dropped as he saw the energy build up on the holographic display. "They're firing," Lena shouted. Before anyone could react, Lyra raised her hand. A barrier of golden light erupted around the starlight horizon, absorbing the blast. The effort cost her. Her glow dimmed, and she staggered, catching herself against the console. "Stop!" Ethan roared into the comm. "Look at what she's doing. She's protecting us, even now." Admiral Carver's voice cut through the silence. "Enough. Stand down. All units. I need a moment to evaluate." The fleet began to pull back, their weapons lowering. On the bridge, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Lyra, who was leaning heavily against the console, her light flickering weakly. "You did it," he said softly. Lyra shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Captain. You did. You gave them a choice." As the fleet held its position, the galaxy's future teetered on the edge. War or peace, destruction or creation. The choice was theirs, but for the first time, it felt like there was hope. The heart of the galaxy. The stars seemed to hold their breath as the starlight horizon hung in the void, surrounded by the silent might of the Union fleet. Captain Ethan Ward stood on the bridge, his heart pounding as the comm system crackled to life. Admiral Carver's voice, clipped and hesitant, broke the quiet. "Captain Ward," the Admiral began, his tone uncertain, "you've managed to delay the inevitable. But a display of light and illusions doesn't erase the destruction this entity has caused." Ethan took a steadying breath, his gaze shifting to Lyra. She stood at the center of the bridge, her glow dimmed but steady, her golden eyes fixed on the swirling energy projections outside. The visions of thriving worlds and restored peace still hung in space, a silent plea for hope. But it wasn't enough. The fleet was faltering, but their fear hadn't been extinguished. "They're still afraid," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone pause. "They cannot see past the shadows of their own terror." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we'll show them the truth again. Not just what's possible, but what's real." "How?" Lena asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "We've already shown them everything." "Not everything," Ethan said, his mind racing. He turned to Lyra. "They need to feel it. Not just see it. They need to understand what you've carried all this time. Can you connect with them?" Lyra's eyes widened slightly. A connection of that magnitude would risk everything. "If they cannot handle it, they'll understand," Ethan interrupted. "They have to. This is our last chance." Lyra hesitated, her glow flickering. She turned her gaze to the viewport, where the Union ships loomed like silent sentinels. "If I do this, there will be no hiding who I am. They will see everything." "Then let them see," Ethan said firmly. "If they can feel what I felt, if they can know the burden you carry, they won't see you as a monster anymore. They'll see the truth." Lyra closed her eyes, and a golden aura began to ripple around her, growing brighter and more vibrant. The bridge filled with warmth, a feeling so profound it brought tears to Ethan's eyes. The light extended outward, reaching the Union fleet like a tidal wave of energy. And then it happened. The crews aboard the Union ships gasped as their minds were flooded with memories, not their own, but Lyra's. They saw her homeworld as it once was, lush fields, golden skies, and a thriving civilization. They felt the terror of the invasion, the pain of losing everything she loved. They experienced the desperation of wielding a power she didn't fully understand, sacrificing her own happiness to save those who couldn't save themselves. They felt her loneliness, centuries of wandering the stars, vilified and hunted, misunderstood by those she had tried to protect. And through it all, They felt her unwavering hope, the hope that someday someone would see her for who she truly was. On the starlight horizon, Ethan and his crew felt it too. Lena wiped tears from her cheeks, her tough exterior momentarily shattered. Garen stared at the glowing figure, his hands trembling as he whispered, "She's not a monster. She never was." Outside, the Union fleet was silent. No weapons fired, no commands were given. Admiral Carver's voice came through the comms, but it was different now, softer, almost reverent. I didn't know," he said, his words faltering. "We didn't know." Lyra's light began to fade, her strength waning as the connection ended. She staggered, and Ethan rushed to catch her. "Lyra, are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "I am," she replied weakly. "But the choice is no longer mine. It is theirs." Ethan turned to the viewport, where the Union fleet had begun to shift. Slowly, one by one, the ships lowered their weapons. The energy readings on the starlight horizon's sensors dropped to zero. The galaxy's most powerful armada had decided to stand down. A transmission came through, and this time, Admiral Carver's tone was one of humility. "Captain Ward, Lyra, I can't speak for the entire Union, but I see now that we were wrong. If there is a way to move forward, to undo the harm we've caused, I want to be part of it." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked at Lyra, who managed a faint smile despite her exhaustion. "They're starting to see," he said softly. "It's a beginning," Lyra replied. "But the road ahead will not be easy." Ethan nodded. "The best roads never are." As the fleet began to pull back, Ethan's heart swelled with hope. The galaxy had been on the brink of war, but now, for the first time in centuries, there was a chance for peace, a chance to heal. And at the heart of it all was Lyra, a being who had endured unimaginable pain, yet never lost faith in the goodness of others. The starlight horizon turned toward the stars, ready to lead the way into a new future. For Lyra, for Ethan, and for the galaxy, this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning.